Hello, let's talk about Australia. So, Australia is in the news, and I'm going to label it the white BLM. Why am I doing that? Because I basically think of it as the same exact movement, just from the other side. And this is not a good thing, right? If you understand BLM properly, you understand that it is part of corporate democracy where you've got two sides, and every 2 to 4 years, or more frequently with the news cycle, they promote hatred of the other, right? The Democrats say the Republicans are racist, sexist, rapists, and the right wing says of the Democrats that they are baby eaters and killing children, blah, blah, blah. Right? So both sides hate each other, and this is not moving toward resolution. The reason that this is happening is because politicians have found that in a democratic system, the best way to incentivize people to vote for you is to make them hate the alternative. Not to say, oh, well, both sides are good and everybody, we're all cool. I just happen to be slightly better than my opponent. It's no, my opponent is evil, my opponent is terrible. And so that's the rhetoric that's used in our media to incentivize people to vote. And in the 2020 election in America, it was supposedly the highest turnout ever before. So what does this mean for Australia? Well, with Americanization, globalization, Australia is inherently tied to American politics. And I mean, you can doubt this, but the whole issue of the mandates is a global issue, right? The whole the WHO, the World Health Organization, this is a global organization. These are global health mandates, right? These are not localized to a particular culture, to a particular country. This is a worldwide problem. We have achieved the New World Order. We have achieved global governance, okay? It may not be here officially. You may have these little maps that are out there that show these borders and nation states. But effectively, the United Nations and that whole concept is in full swing, a concept that has been really, I mean, in existence for thousands of years, but I don't think has been realized until today with technology. So, what is the fundamental contention? What is in question here? Not really much, right? The protesters seem to have the demand that they have freedom. They have freedom. Well, let's talk about freedom of health. Let's talk about the freedom of what goes into our bodies. If you eat fish, you're not free to have there be no mercury in the fish, right? If it's in the world's oceans, there's going to be mercury in the fish. If you want to drink water, there's probably antidepressants in that water. You know, if you want to go to the grocery store and buy food, there's probably microplastics, xenoestrogens, vegetable oils. And we can take actions to try to prevent these things. But these things are harmful. These things are intergenerational. These things are, and they've been going on for a while, right? And so to focus pedantically on a particular thing reminds me of the other crisis that's happening across the pond in America with these Haitian migrants trying to get across the southern border. Kind of a weird convoluted. How did they end up in Mexico in the first place if they're Haitian? Whatever. The point is that this is being made into a left versus right issue. Now, with Joe Biden as president, the left obviously doesn't care about migrants like they would under Trump, but it's still being used as an issue to say, oh, you know, we have a terrible immigrant, look, these poor children or whatever they're calling them. And then on the other side, Tucker Carlson came out and said, this is the great replacement, we're going to be replaced in our own country. The fact is that if you zoom out for a second, you see that any of these individual things, whether it's a health mandate, whether it's immigration across the border, that these are part of larger structures. And that focusing on any one of these things is myopic, it's pedantic, it's grifting, It is trying to stir up hatred and fear and a feeling of crisis, a feeling that we're under attack and we need to do something now. And usually, do something now means watch my show, give me ratings, give me money, buy my book, make me popular, etc. This is how people get attention. In the case of the actual protesters, obviously, they're not trying to do that. But what is their motivation? I think that these are people who have experienced the long stagnation of working class wages, where productivity has risen due to automation and technology, but wages have not. And so I just saw today houses from like 1937 or something in America, and it was being sold for about $1,000. Now, of course, adjusted with inflation today, that would be $20,000, but still, where in the country can you buy a brand new house? You know, a 3-bedroom house for $20,000, it's just not possible. I mean, unless there's some kind of, it's it's the site of a murder, or there's some kind of extenuating circumstances. It's sat next to a sinkhole, something crazy. But just a regular perfect house for $20,000, you can't do that, right? You can't do that anymore because inflation has not regularly affected, because that's adjusted for inflation. Remember, inflation since 1937, the value of $1 then would be about $20 now. But real estate has not tracked with inflation. Real estate has actually shot up incredibly. And that's for many different reasons, but whatever the underlying cause is, the effect is that for working class people, it's really, really difficult to find cheap, affordable housing, which means it's really, really difficult to afford to raise a family in decent conditions. You look at urbanized places like New York or wherever, who wants to raise kids in a tiny 1-bedroom apartment in New York? Some people do it, often immigrants do it, but people who are accustomed to having breathing space and being able to live comfortably or decently in a way that comports with our expectations of first world standards, most people don't want to do that. And so there's that economic factor. As I said before, there's kind of this cultural factor of these people are out on the streets because they don't trust their government. So they're angry for the economic reasons, and they're angry and distrustful because every 2 to 4 years, or the daily news cycle is telling them, your government is filled with evil people who hate you. On both sides, the left and the right both do this because we don't have a common core Christianity in our societies anymore, that Christianity has been hollowed out, and liberalism as an alternative has not taken the place of Christianity. What I would suggest here with these general centralizations, globalizations, movements of people, global ordinances, rules forcing you to do this, that, or the other, this is a move toward liberal centralization. And in a sense, this is necessary, right? It is necessary because we used to have centralized societies around Christianity. If you went around blaspheming Jesus, you might be put to death, right? That was not unusual for Christian societies up until Renaissance and Enlightenment started to break down those taboos in favor of what we call liberalism today. Liberalism in some sense merely means a deconstructive anti-Christian force to be replaced by something else. We don't really know what, that hasn't quite solidified. But through technology, through global governance, through economic centralization, which results in the lowering of working class wages, all of these things are moving toward a something beyond. And some people believe, this is all going to collapse like a house of cards. This is like the Tower of Babel. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know on what time scale it's going to happen. If I look at the Roman Empire, for me, is a great model for understanding the process of global centralization. Now, at that time, due to technology, the Roman Empire was limited in its capacity for expansion, but it basically expanded as far as it technologically could. It ran into the Sahara Desert. It ran into the cold, barren wastelands of Northern Europe. It ran into, the Parthian Empire, which was quite formidable in its own sense, in its own respect, conquered the known world to Afghanistan and down to the deserts of Saudi Arabia and up to the Caucasus Mountains and the mountains of, and they had above them, they had the Scythians, who were quite hard to conquer, very similar to the Germanics that the Romans just said that it's not really worth it to conquer these people. They're these wild nomads. They don't have a lot of natural resources. They're too hard to kill, so we'll just leave them alone. But we can look at these semi-global empires as models for the rise and fall of these big central states. And in the case of Rome, Rome expands, and then reaches a breaking point where religiously, culturally, politically, theologically, socially, economically, everything reaches a crisis point around the time of Caesar, and you transition from republic to empire. America has not quite yet done that. So America has, in a sense, conquered the world, but it's not quite ready for that period of crisis. We can maybe see it on the horizon. Maybe it's going to happen within our lifetimes. But when we pass through that period of crisis, it doesn't mean the collapse and dissolution of the American empire, and it doesn't actually mean that America becomes weaker or that America recedes from the global stage or that America gives up its overseas colonies, tributaries, however you want to call them, its sphere of influence. It actually means that America could continue to strengthen under a new imperial ideology. And I think we can see that imperial ideology on the horizon already with basically feminist neoconservatism, which is moving into a neoliberal stage where you're seeing justifications to stay in Afghanistan on the basis of feminism, right? I think that is viable. You may disagree with it, you may think it's terrible, but I think it's viable as a path forward for America to justify imperial centralization all over the globe on the basis of this type of liberal ideology. Now, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe something completely different is going to happen. But this is the direction we're moving toward. And if you can't understand the precedent of Rome and you can't understand the augmentation of technology, you don't understand the will to power that's driving these incentive structures to bring us to this point, and you're just like, well, I just want to be free. I just want to be free. I'm going to go out, I'm going to protest, I'm going to complain, I'm going to cause trouble, and eventually the government will relent. Well, here's the fact of the matter of, if these protests ever rise to the level of threat, where they're actually threatening the integrity of the Australian government to force these mandates on people, they're going to go to your cell phone data. They're going to find who are the ringleaders, who are the organizers, who is making this thing happen. They're going to put those people, they're going to incarcerate them. Australians, as far as I know, don't really have the Second Amendment rights. If they did, that would be another stage. You can keep going up that stage, right? Where Australian SWAT teams are coming to people's houses at 3 a.m., putting black bags over their heads and taking them to the Australian Guantanamo. I forget which island they used to hold people, but they have plenty of islands. Extraterritorial. I mean, it's the United States model, right? Where you say, oh yeah, Australia is free, but if we just take you off the territory, you don't have any rights anymore. So that could happen, but at the end of the day, suffice it to say, whatever you think could happen in Australia, civil wars are not fought between masses and elites. Civil wars are fought between elites and elites. So in America, we had a civil war between a southern aristocracy and a northern industrial elite. And the southern aristocracy was very competent. I mean, these people were intelligent, they were connected, they were educated, right? They were at the top level of society. They were wealthy, okay? These Australian protesters don't have anyone like that on their side, okay? Fox News in America, I don't know what the equivalent is in Australia, but Fox News in America with people like Tucker Carlson, they're going out and they're complaining about these developments. But there is a grift going on. There is a grift where you're weaponizing these complaints to draw in an audience, to draw in some sort of attention. You're directing it toward people like Donald Trump, who is a reality TV star. who is not going to fundamentally change any of these things. And I mean, we could go into the full critique of Trump if people really still believe in Donald Trump. But that's what Tucker Carlson is pointing toward. It's people like Trump. And maybe it won't be Trump. Maybe it'll be DeSantis, right? But whoever it is going to follow the same GOP model. Again, I don't know what the Conservative Party is called in Australia, but I don't really need to know to understand this analysis, right? This is the situation. The BLM protests, to kind of cap it off, were useless. You know, 9 unarmed black men. That's basically what they were protesting. And at the end of the day, what kind of percentage is that among the shootings in Chicago and Detroit, obesity? Probably lactose intolerance kills more black people, unarmed black people, than the police, right? So the myopia of it, the emotional terrorism of it. It's the same thing on the right with Muslim terrorism, where, yes, we've had Muslim terrorism, but you're more likely to be bit by sharks and hit by lightning and killed by cops than you are to be killed by Muslim terrorists. And yet, I've had right-wingers telling me for years and years and years since 9/11, I'm afraid of getting hit by or killed by Muslim terrorists. And I remember when I was a little kid and that rhetoric was around, I was never, fully bought into that, but I was fear-mongered too, and I was scared of, like, what if Muslim terrorists blow things up? Now that I'm not a child anymore, I've used the critical thinking to get beyond that. But most people are like children. The protesters in BLM are like children. The protesters in Australia are like children. It doesn't mean I hate them or resent them. It just means that they're having a temper tantrum. And having a temper tantrum when you're a 5-year-old against your fully grown parents, unless your parents are weak and they're just going to give you whatever you want, it doesn't work. Temper tantrums don't work. Protests don't work. With respect to BLM, I don't think it accomplished anything. I think it was very performative. I think it was, it destroyed small businesses. It didn't hurt corporate America. It didn't hurt the profits of white supremacists like Bill Gates and Koch brothers and Warren Buffett and whoever, right? So at the end of the day, that is the fate of these Australian protests, that they are going to create much sound and fury signifying nothing. Will these people get their freedom? No. At the quote-unquote best case scenario is the government says, okay, you have the choice whether you want to put this in your body or not this year. But maybe next year, a worse strain comes out. Now we're back to the same issue all over again. We remember kind of with Brexit, is another issue where it's like, we're going to leave the EU. It's this big important issue for XYZ, for immigration. Well, now the UK has more third world immigration than ever before and less European immigration than ever before. So great job with Brexit. You're still tied to the European Union through all these economic treaties anyway, right? So all of the actual causes behind Brexit were defeated. You just got the symbolic victory. Same with Trump. People said, I'm voting for Trump for immigration. There was more immigration than ever before under Trump. I'm voting for Trump because I stand for traditional marriage. Well, Trump moved the needle toward the LGBTQ on every single issue over his 4 years of presidency. Well, I'm voting for Trump for, Christian values. Well, Christianity, especially evangelical Christianity, has continued to decline under Trump. Well, I'm voting for Trump because I want a strong economy for the working class. How's it looking for the working class in America? It's not looking good, okay? So whether we look at Trump, whether we look at Brexit, whether we look at BLM, whether we look at the Australian protests, on the left, on the right, doesn't matter. These are all superficial, and we have to dig deeper. We have to ask, what is politics? Politics is not, as it has been displayed through the Democratic TV and the media, that politics is all about protesting and complaining and begging and crying for help. Politics is about power. Politics isn't about saying, I want this, and whining and throwing a tantrum in the streets and throwing stones at buildings and whatever, destroying small businesses. That's not what politics is about. Politics is about power, and there are 3 paths to power: media, military, and money. And so if you're not gaining rank in the military and you're not creating effective media, and you're not building that up, which the other part of that is religion, the flip side of media, religion, and you're not building up money, then you're not doing anything. You're wasting your time. Trump, BLM, Australian protests, it's all a waste of time. What's tragic to me is that people might die. People are getting their skulls cracked out in the streets, and they might die. And I think that's a tragedy, to die over something that doesn't matter. It's not effective. It's not a good political strategy. And I think that is tragic, and I think people should be directed toward building up relationships, business relationships, church relationships, personal relationships. I think people should be asking themselves, what is politics for me? Politics for me is, how do I gain power for myself? How do I gain power for my community? How do I gain power for my church? How do I gain power for my business? What actions can I take in my life to expand my power over myself, my self-control, my discipline? How can I expand the power of my group, of my identity? How can I function in the society? Because we have to take these things for granted. These things are bigger than you or me. And the only way to rise to that level where you can start making civilizational decisions, like maybe we should run the global empire a different way, because that's really the questions that people are focused on a daily basis. But those questions are not relevant to 99.999% of people. And they're ignoring the questions that are relevant to their life because those questions are hard and those questions are not as sexy and they're not as exciting. But that's the work that needs to be done. So, hope you enjoyed. Thanks for listening, and I will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Nice. Subscribe. Very good.
Nice. Beautiful.
Very good.
Beautiful. You're going to love it. If you love autism, you're going to love my channel. Okay, great.
All right.